Okay, up on the screen, you're looking at a really short paragraph, and essentially, I know I've got a misspelling up there when I spelled the, you'll see that in a second, but essentially it says the temperature last night was -2. The wind chill makes it seem like it's 5 degrees colder. What was the wind chill temperature? So to figure this out, we've got to break this down and find out, first of all, what it's asking and then the information that we're going to need for it. So it's actually asking us to set up an equation to solve this. And so if we look up here, we're going to pull out first the information that is important. So the first thing I'm going to look at is we know that the -2 is important. That's where we're starting out. That's what your temperature was. And we know that the 5 degrees is important. And I know that colder is important because that tells me if that 5 is a positive or a negative, right? So if you get hotter, then that's a positive number, so you're going up on the number line. But if you go colder, you're actually going negative on the number line because you're getting colder, so you're going down it to the left. So that's a clue that you need to look at. Now, the second part of this, it says, well, what was the wind chill then? And so they don't want to know what the temperature was -2. But the wind chill temperature, you have to include what it feels like, and that's 5 degrees, even colder. So over to the right here, I'm going to go ahead and set up the equation. So I know that last night's temperature was -2, and I know that the 5 is also negative, so let me put the -5 over here. Okay. And when they say what was the wind chill temperature, well, you've got to add those two together to find it, because if you start at 2 and you go -5 more, you got to add those together. So our operation is addition. Okay, so we know that when we have a negative plus a negative, that you go ahead and add them because you're starting out at -2, left on the number line is 0, and then you're going -5 more. So on this one, if you put that on a number line, you'd actually get a -7. So if you start at -2 and go -5 more, you get a -7. Or you can just look at it this way. You can say that they're both negative numbers, so you add them together. So 5 plus 2 is 7. They're both negative, so the answer is negative. Okay, so this would be your answer to that question. So pretty simple, but you're going to see one of these on your homework that's going to look almost identical to this, but you're going to have to break it apart. It's going to be a little different though. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to the next one. So let me move it up here so we get this off the screen. Okay, now on this next one, this is just a simple solve question. So over here, just for the directions, I'm just going to say go ahead and solve. Okay. And what I'm going to have you solve is actually a fraction. I know you guys love these fractions. So let's work with -2/3, and let's subtract that from 3/5. Okay. So the first thing you want to do, remember, when you're using the steps, is to change the subtraction problem into an addition problem. Okay, and to do that, you first go ahead and write down the first equation, and I'll go ahead and color code these. So here's our first one. I'm going to always use green for that one. So we have -2/3. The first step is this subtraction. We just take that and make it addition. Okay, so that's out of the way now. And then the second part of it is dealing with this part right here, and I'll make that red. So the second part is after you make an addition, you change the second number into the additive inverse. And remember, the additive inverse is just the opposite. So this is 3/5, so the additive inverse would be -3/5. Okay, so we're pretty good there now, and slide that screen back up a little bit. Okay, so the only thing we've got to do now is go ahead and add them. But remember, when you're adding and subtracting fractions, you've got to have like denominators. So right now our denominators are 3 and 5. So they're not the same. So I'm going to do the simple method, which I'm just going to multiply the 3 and the 5 together to get a common denominator. Okay, so if I multiply those together, what you get is 15. So 15 there, and switch to red so I'm consistent here, and 15 here. Okay, so all I did is made a common denominator between 3 and 5 by multiplying them together, and I got 15. So now I've got to change the numerators. So I changed them by the same factor that I changed the bottom. So let me go back to green because we're going to do that one first. Okay, so to get 3 to be 15, we multiplied it by 5. So you have to multiply the 2 by 5 also, and that's a negative 2. So negative 2 times 5 is 10. Okay, so go back to red. And on this one, we multiplied 5 by 3 to get 15. And so we have to multiply the negative 3 by 3 also. So that gives us a negative 9. Okay, so now we have the same denominator. We can go ahead and add or subtract. Now I'm going to leave this in red because I'm going to show you a trick. When you're adding and subtracting fractions, in the past you've learned this and hopefully you remember it, but you always keep the same denominator that you were using. So essentially this problem right here could look like this. It could be the same thing as negative 10 plus negative 9 over 15, because we know that 15 is our denominator, right? Okay, so the answer is still going to have 15 on the bottom. So we have to look at it and say, what's negative 10 plus a negative 9? Well, if we start at negative 10 on a number line and then add to it negative 9, that's negative 9. You have to go to the left 9 more, and so now you're at negative 19. Okay, so that is actually your answer, but the problem with this one is negative 19 over 15 is an improper fraction, so we've got to reduce that down. So, and we do that by seeing how many times the denominator will fit into the numerator without going over. So 15 will fit into 19 just one time. And this is a negative number, so I want to make sure to get that negative in there. So negative 1, meaning that 15 goes in 19 only one time. And then if you take 15 from that 19, you've got 4 left over. So 4 of the 15ths are still left over. So your answer to that one is negative 1 and 4/15. Okay, so that's another kind. Now the next problem, what I'm going to write down is it's going to ask you to do the same type of solving the problem, but it's going to give you multiple solutions. Okay, so what I'm going to say is, I'll get my writing tool back up there, and we'll go back to green. Okay, so I'm going to say which statement makes the answer positive. Okay, remember, we're looking for the one that's going to make it positive. And the equation I'm going to give you is negative 5 minus something, I'll put a box because we don't know what, equals a positive number. Okay, so that's what we're looking for, and it gives you a couple of examples. So our examples, we're going to say example A is going to be 5. For B, we'll go ahead and put in 7. For C, we will put in negative 4. And for D, let's go ahead and use negative 6. Okay. So if we go through and work that out, what we have to do is we have to plug each one of these into this equation and see if the answer is positive. Now, 3 of them are going to be false. They're not going to equal positive, and one of them is going to be true. And so you have to circle the one that is. So let's go ahead and look at it. So for A, let's plug this into the equation. So the equation up here starts with negative 5 minus, and then over here is a positive 5. So I'm going to put just a positive 5 there. Now, step 1, make that a addition problem, so change it. So we have negative 5 plus, first step is make that addition, and then the second part, look at the 5 and do the additive inverse. So the additive inverse of 5 is negative 5. Okay, so now I have negative 5 plus a negative 5. Well, that's not positive because that gives us negative 10. So we know that that one's not it. So we can cross that one out. So for this one, we have negative 5, use our equation, minus, and then they say 7. So let's try 7. Again, change it into a addition problem. So we have negative 5 plus negative 7. Okay, again, we have a negative plus a negative, so we're just getting more negative. In this case, we're at negative 12 now. Okay, so that's not going to work either. Let's try negative 4. So we have negative 5 minus, and in this case, negative 4. Okay, so we change that into an addition problem, so then we have negative 5, and then make that a plus, and then the additive inverse of negative 4 is positive 4. Okay, so you can look at this one in two ways. We have a negative 5 plus 4, so a negative and a positive when you're adding and subtract, or yeah, when you're adding, if they're different, you have to subtract them. And essentially, the other way is to look at it like a number line. If you start at negative 5 and then you go right positive 4, you end up at negative 1. Or if you do it the first way, like I was saying, if you have a negative and a positive, subtract them, and then keep the sign of the bigger number, you still get negative 1. Okay, so whichever makes sense to you. So is that positive? No, it's still negative, so it doesn't work either. So we know that one doesn't work. And on the last one, we have negative 5 minus, and in this one, we have negative 6. Okay, change it into an addition problem. So negative 5, make that plus. The additive inverse of negative 6 is 6. So if you start a number line on negative 5, you go 6 to the right, you end up at a positive 1. Okay, so the only correct one that makes this equation positive is answer D. Okay, so the next step is we're actually going to look at a couple of problems that you're going to do today. So we'll go ahead and switch to the next slide and get started.